Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be working on a parasitic draw problem on an old body style GMT 400 truck. Now, this truck in particular is a 6.5 liter diesel truck, so there's a battery here and there's another battery over on the other side. Now the fact there's two batteries doesn't really change much, but I'll show you how you factor that in to doing this type of diagnostic. So first off, let's take a look at the service manual. So in the service manual for these trucks, now this is a 98, but it's a 99 actually, old body style carryover, but it doesn't matter. They both be the same kind of text. And we go to the section in the manual under parasitic load testing. And all I'm really going to show you from this is, because I'm going to walk through how I do this type of testing. We don't need the special tools that they're talking about, but we're going to take note of this comment here, right? So they tell you to note the reserve capacity of the battery. If the vehicle has a diesel engine with two batteries, add the reserve capacities together. If the vehicle is only equipped with an aux battery, only use the reserve capacity of the main battery. Divide that number by 4, and then compare that to what you might get on an ammeter reading. And they're telling you that the current drain shouldn't exceed that number. So for example, if the battery has an RC of 100 minutes, the current drain that you get on your meter shouldn't exceed 25 milliamps. So this particular battery has got a reserve capacity. This AC Delco battery, if we see here on the label, has a reserve capacity of 140. And since there's two of them, we're going to add that together. So that's 280. And we pop out our handy calculator. We're just going to take the 140. We're going to multiply that by 2 because we got two batteries. We're going to divide that by 4 like the service manual says, and it says 70 milliamps is the most that we should see. Now that's actually higher than I would prefer, but that's what GM says. So if we take a look at the actual draw, I'm going to be using one of these kind of meters. This is a Uni-T UT210E. I like these because the loop part goes down very low on DC amperage. So I'm going to set this guy to 2 amps. And we're going to cycle him over. He starts off at AC. We're going to cycle him to DC. We're going to zero him out, and we're going to hook him up right here on the positive terminal. And right now, if we look at the meter, we're getting a draw of just over an amp, 1.139. Now, part of that's going to be this hood light that we got over here. So if we pan up here, I'm just going to come over and disconnect this connector on the firewall. And as I disconnect that connector, if we watch the meter, it's going to go down. And what we're going to be left with is the true draw that we're hunting for, which is sitting around 95 milliamps here. So the calculation we did said 70, and the reason I told you that I don't like that particular calculation myself is that that can still drain the battery pretty fast. Now here's a copy. I've made a table from a 2014 service manual, Chevrolet truck service manual. I just happened to have this nice table and I liked it. And this table is telling you how many days a battery will last with one of these draws. So they give you an example of a battery that's got 690 CCAs and it's got 110 RC. And if we assume it starts off at 80% of its charge, they're saying based on this table with the various draws is how long it'll take until it goes down to only 50% of that charge. Of course, differences in RCs and temperatures and CCAs will change this, but for this example, it's very illustrative. So we can see with the type of draw that we're talking about here, which was just under 100 milliamps, right? The battery would be drained down in this example in just over a week, right? And then 2 weeks if it was 75 milliamps. And so you can get an idea here. A 1 amp draw, like we started with the hood light, if we happen, you happen to leave your hood up and you don't unplug that, in less than a day, you'll draw the battery down. So it's good to keep in mind that these kind of draws can very quickly exhaust a battery on a vehicle that's not driven daily. If you've got a vehicle you only drive once a week, that's when you start to see problems from these kind of parasitic drains. So my preference is not the calculation in the service manual of 70. Personally, for these old body style trucks, I would go with 40 milliamps. Anything over 40, I'd go hunting for. In this case, we're definitely going to go hunting for it because it's close to 100. It's kind of fluctuating around that value. So let me show you the setup that we're going to need. What we're going to need to be able to do is take a look at fuses without having different circuits come powered on. So we're done under the hood by disconnecting the hood light. Let me show you in the interior what we've done. All right, guys, and then on the interior, what we've done, you can take a piece of plastic, or in this case, I've taken a piece of wood, and we just want to close the switch that controls the dome lights, because we're going to be doing some work in this fuse box as well. Of course, you got to pull this panel off before you do that. And then we're going to wait 15 to 30 minutes until everything settles down so that we can verify that we're back to the original amount that we measured when we had the door closed. So we're going to go back under the hood, we're going to make sure everything's settled down, and we're going to start this parasitic draw test. All right, guys, so we're back at the same amount here. Now you might be wondering, why does it kind of fluctuate? Well, part of why it fluctuates is there are other modules that are still alive. Right? For example, the theft lock on the Delco radio is going to be periodically pulsing an LED. That's going to be a slight draw here and there. The remote door lock control module, when you have remote keyless entry on a key fob, that's always got some power so they can detect when you're hitting the button to unlock the door. So that's going to be periodically drawing as well. So that's why this value might have some slight fluctuation in it. And of course, then there's also potentially, using the clamp type of approach versus inlining the amp meter, you're going to get something. But for a parasitic draw, these type of loops work fine. All right, so the first place we're going to go hunting is in this fuse box. Remove this cover for this fuse box here. And the technique we're going to be doing, now the service manual back in this era would have talked about removing fuses one at a time and watching the meter. That works on these old trucks, but it doesn't work on anything more new. So when you start getting into like the new body style trucks, they have more modules, so 99, 2000 and on, that technique is obsolete. So I'm going to show you a technique that works for the newer vehicles as well as the older vehicles, and that's a voltage drop test. So to do that, we need to have a second meter, and we're going to set our second meter on volts. We get our leads unwound here. We're going to set our second meter on volts, and the technique is pretty simple. We're going to come in here on each of these fuses, and there are test points on the fuses. You can see them on these maxi fuses. They're harder to see on these mini fuses, but there's test points. And all we're going to do is we're going to make contact. So I'll start with like this 10 amp fuse right here. We're going to put our one lead on the first test point, and if we zoom in, we'll be able to see what we're doing, and the other lead on the second one, and then if we look at the meter, we can see it's 0. Now, there's a little minus sign over there, so if that bothers you, you can flip the polarity on these test points. But what you want to see is 0, right? And then you see this, that minus sign is kind of twitching there as my hand twitches. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to each of these and make that same measurement. And I'm going to verify I'm getting 0 for all of them. So I'm going to go measure all these. We'll fast forward through all of this. Now you notice on that one, it started off with a value and then dropped down. So you got to watch for two things. You got to watch for having a good connection, because there can be some corrosion on these test points. And you got to watch for the meter to settle. So it might start off with a non-zero value at first. Now see, this one here is a potential problem. Whenever I see one that gives me a reading, I like to try and make multiple probes of it to be sure, because as you can see, a lot of times it can be just your contact with the test points and corrosion with the test points can give you a false reading. So we want to make sure that we try it a couple of times. All right, so we've done all the mini fuses and we didn't find a voltage drop. So now we're going to do these bigger maxi fuses. Let's see here again where we have these kind of crazy readings. We know we have to either move our leads away because there might be some corrosion, or we're not getting a good connection. Because if you do have a voltage drop, it's not going to fluctuate. It's going to be a solid reading. Right, so like that right there. So you want to get a solid 0 reading. All right, so what do we know? Well, we know the parasitic drain is not coming from any of the circuits controlled by these fuses. And we've been able to check for that without waking up anything in the system that would have happened if we pulled the fuse. So by doing this technique, we're passively looking for the drain. So now let's go move to the fuse box inside the interior. All right, guys, so now we've just got a bank of mini fuses left to do. So we'll start down here, same technique. I'll go ahead and fast forward through this. Now you see this one, guys, this particular circuit here in position 3, we're just getting a steady reading that's non-zero. And that tells me that this has got a draw on it. This is not a corrosion type thing because it's not fluctuating. Let's go do the other two. Naturally, it was like the third one from the last one we were going to do. So this is the only one that we got a reading on, number 3. It's so hard to see these little test points. If I get it on there correctly, looks like it's 0.003 volts. All right, so that's our culprit, or at least one of our culprits. So now we're going to pull that fuse out. First, we're going to see what fuse that is. So 3 is the courtesy lamp circuit, of all things. And it's pretty easy to see that the courtesy lamps are not on currently. But to make sure that's it, we're going to pull that 20 amp fuse out. And we're going to see if we have a draw under the hood still. All right, so this definitely looks like our culprit, right? So now we're reading 0.004 milliamps. And again, it's fluctuating slightly, and I would attribute that fluctuation to the circuit with the radio more than anything else. So let's do a double check to see if that is likely to be our guy. So here's a voltage drop chart. And this comes from the guys over at Power Probe, made these. We can see if we measure 0.3 of a millivolt and we have a 20 amp mini fuse, that represents a 93 milliamp draw. So 93, we're currently reading 3 or 4. That would have put us up to 5 or 6, and that seems like the range of what we were reading. So I believe we found our parasitic draw. The reason for a chart like this is you may have more than one, and we may have went through this exercise and we may have found more than one fuse that gave us that voltage drop reading, and this would be a way to determine which one is contributing the most to that problem. So I'll just kind of pause this on here because there's not really a PDF or anything here. The guys at Power Probe got rid of these charts for some reason, but I had kept copies from back when they had them. This is the mini fuse version, and it goes all the way up to a voltage measurement of 10 millivolts. And then the other version here is for the maxi fuses, the bigger ones. Now, the reason these are different, of course, is this type of measurement of voltage drop correlating to milliamperage is going to depend on the size of the metal in the fuse, right? And so the maxi fuses are bigger, they're going to have a different drop value. And here's the second page of that for your reference. All right, so now we know what it is. Let's go figure out why it is. All right, so let's take a look at circuit 3, different volume of the service manual. And when we take a look at this circuit here in the lighting system section of body and accessories, this particular circuit is the interior lighting piece. Now what I'm looking for primarily is what's on here, right? So let's see. We've got courtesy lamps. We've got overhead console. If you've got keyless entry, you've got the remote control door lock receiver. Reading lamps up in the center as well. And this goes down here to show the front and rear reading lamps. And here's the overhead console lamp. So this whole circuit is light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs, with the exception of this one module. And I don't believe we need to suspect this module, because if we had a problem with the module, we wouldn't have keyless entry working correctly. So one of these lights is on. Now, why are we not seeing any lights on? Well, you got to remember, guys, there are some lights you can't see. The lights that are on the back of the mirrors and the light that is in the glove box, which I'm sure is on here somewhere, is on this circuit. So those are the three that we're going to go take a look at. So let's go take a look at those. All right, guys, we put the fuse back in, we put our cover back on, but we're leaving the switch depressed because I want to show you something. So the three lamps I talked to you about activate even with the switch closed, even with the door closed. So if you got the door closed and the window down, right, you'll still see what I'm talking about here. And those are the two lights on the sun visors and the light in the glove box. Now, the light in the glove box has got its own separate switch. And the best way to check all of this stuff is in a nice shady area, or late at night, like dusk type lighting, so you can see this, and you'd be able to see if that light's on. So that's not our culprit. That's not our culprit. But this is our culprit, right? And so if we come up close to the headliner here, we slowly pull this guy down, what we can see is he's on. And the reason he's on is he's broken. This has broke. And because this is broke, it's not holding this little switch down. And that is our parasitic drain of all things. So that is what's killing the battery on this truck that would normally get driven at least, once every week and a half, but that's just not enough. So we're going to have to pull this sun visor off to repair it. So that's it on the video for how to do a parasitic draw test and how to locate the failure in the circuit. You got to have the service manual, because you're going to need the various schematics for whichever one of these fuses ends up being the one. I'm going to go ahead and show you swapping out this particular sun visor in case it's something that you might find valuable. But that was it for the parasitic draw test. All right, so let's go ahead and pull the sun visor. So the sun visor on this model is held in by 3 Phillips head screws. And when we pull these screws out, we're going to find that there's a wiring harness in here to supply the lights. Now the repair for this is a couple of different options. I'm going to move this kind of over to the side here so we can get this one. We can just pull the bulbs out of this, because this is a discontinued part. We can try to find a better one at the salvage yard, or we can just pull it off here and disconnect it. Now, it turns out I have an NOS one of these, so I'm actually going to put a new one on. But any one of the 3 techniques I just mentioned will work for getting rid of this parasitic draw. And to get the bulbs out, you don't need to remove it, of course. You can pop the lenses. I'll show you that after I get this guy off. All right, and yep, there's our connector right there. All right, guys, so this kind of connector is a real pain, because you have to lift this up enough to clear this little tab that's on the plug. These just weren't meant to be removed that often, and the reason I don't like it is, it's a lot of stress on an old connector, but it is what it is, right? All right, so it's basically got a deal like this, right? There's a little keyway here. Make sure it goes in a certain way, and then it's got a little notch. And that little notch gets clicked on this part of the outside housing. So if we were just going to try and get rid of the bulbs, there's a little tab at the back here, I guess. I'm trying to remember where the little tab is. I think it's right here in the back. Trying to be super gentle with it, but I think I see the tab right there. You never know when something's going to break, right? There we go. All right. And there's the bulb. These bulbs were not meant to be replaced. And so all I'm suggesting you might be able to do is unplug it from the connector. I don't know if you can or not. Doesn't look like you can, so that route's a bust. You won't be able to actually get this out without breaking it, I don't think. I was hoping it would just be like a 74 type bulb that plugs into this thing. But if it is, it's really wedged in there. Anything you would grab it with would probably crush it. So I take that back because that might not be a viable solution for this problem for you. I don't know if GM glued that bulb in there or what, but it's just not easily coming out. So my take on that would be, best bet would be just to disconnect it and put it back in if you want to get rid of this draw and you don't have a replacement. But when I'll put the part numbers at the bottom, they sometimes show up. All right, so guys, what I'd suggest you do, so we're going to put this back on unplugged. It's going to take a while to track down a nicer unit at the salvage yard. But we don't want to have the plug get up in here and get to where we can't reach it, and don't want to be pulling the headliner down to get it. So I'm just going to stick a little piece of string on here. And of course, got the camera in front of my face, so I can't really see that well. All right. Then we're just going to put this sun visor back on, unplugged. I'm actually going to put a different one on that is at least a little less damaged than the one that we have here. Just got to get oriented where I can see it with the camera here and not push the string in and defeat the whole purpose of having put that up there. All right, there we go. So that's it for this, guys. I'll put some part numbers in the description for these visors. There's different ones for different colors, of course. They're discontinued, but they do show up from time to time on eBay. And of course, you can sometimes find a lower mileage, nice cherry unit at the salvage yard that you can use to kind of repair something like this. If you found this useful and it helped you find your parasitic draw, appreciate you taking the time to hit that like button. It really helps with the discovery of the video. And as always, thanks for watching.